Now, we are going to talk also about the local government conference last week. An extraordinary intervention. I sat here and went, oh my God, I wish I was doing the show last week when I was actually in the Bay of Plenty, ironically, discovering the delights of that particular region, and particularly the east coasts of it. No, the extraordinary local government conference at which Minister Chris Bishop and then local government minister as well both made speeches to the local government conference and essentially said, stop what you're doing. You're doing it wrong. You're doing it too expensive. And we've got a better plan and idea called the Resource Management Act, or at least our amendment to it. And all councils must stop all policy and planning, was the directive that Chris Bishop gave to the Local Government New Zealand Conference last week, ahead of us getting our act together in Wellington and introducing legislation that will significantly reform resource management in this country, and then, as a consequence of that, obviously, all the roles and responsibilities that regional, city and district councils have consequent. Well, joining us to talk about the implications of that, because from my vantage, and I am a regional councillor, as you know, everybody seems to be struggling about what do we do next and what does this really mean, is the chairperson of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, Doug Leeder, and he joins us now. Doug, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you on.
Good morning, Michael.
Mm.
Thanks for having
me. Were you in, sorry, now I wasn't at the local government conference. I was in your neck of the woods while you were away last week, presumably going to this conference. Was it in Wellington, was it? Or is it in Christchurch?
Christchurch, Michael. Christchurch.
Christchurch. Why did you have it in Christchurch when the Christchurch City Council's pulled out of Local Government New Zealand?
That was a decision of Local Government New Zealand, not actually of the participants. So that was set up July last year when at the conference. But it's a good question. I'm not too sure when Christchurch pulled out, whether it was before that notice was made or afterwards. But I mean, it was a great venue. But yes, as you know, Christchurch were not there. Auckland wasn't there, and some other local authorities.
Western Bay of Plenty and all of the West Coast of the South Island councils are pulled out as well.
Yeah,
nonetheless, you were there.
The mayor from the Western Bay of Plenty was there. Westland Regional Council wasn't there, as you know, they've pulled out, and I think there's a couple of others that pulled out as well.
Yeah. Listen, two big talking points that came out of that conference that will affect all councils in New Zealand was the announcement by Chris Bishop that you should immediately desist from all policy and planning until the government, as I said in my introduction, introduces its significant reform of resource management in this country and then clearly defines what the roles of councils are, consequence, and of plans and policies in that regime. What was the reaction in the room when Chris Bishop made that announcement?
Well, if you just take a step back from that, because I heard your introductory comments, and I think you are right. The complexity around this is that essentially in recent weeks, EDS sought a declaratory judgment from the court, and the court came out and said, councils, you must implement the law as it is currently scripted. In other words, you should not consider the future intentions of the government because it may or may not appear. Therein lies the complexity. So elected members, on one hand, know that this is going to change. On the other hand, you have the court saying that you must interpret it as it's currently written. And that is a really difficult thing for elected members to contemplate, because on one hand, staff will tell you that if we go ahead with this, if we don't go ahead with the plan change or whatever it is, in relation to the existing law, you run the risk of having some judicial review or judicial intervention. That is not that's not a situation that a lot of elected members are prepared to take on. But I think if that's the intention of the government, the quicker they make the change and give direction in terms of the regulation change, the better. Then we know where we are.
Okay. Now, the other thing that I immediately sent an email to my chief executive and said, this would seem to make sure that in our particular case, a draft regional policy statement, which is quite important, can I just explain to listeners, it means it sort of sets the framework in which all the city and district councils draft their own plans. But that would have to stop as well. And he said, listen, we're scrambling. This is the chief executive of the Otago Regional Council. We're scrambling. We don't know what all this means. We're having to digest it, and obviously there'll be discussions. Your chief executive, I'm sure, will be having discussions with him and chief executives throughout all the country trying to work out what all this means. Have you got in your own mind, Doug, a view as of Monday morning as to what it does mean and what the directive actually means to your council?
Precisely what you said, Michael, that all these plan changes should be a cease and desist. That doesn't mean to say that some community consultation in terms of preparing for the new regime, especially in terms of catchment management, land use, etc., shouldn't take place concurrently with the communities, the communities affected. So I don't think it's a stop everything. If we want to go and have consultation with the communities and lay out what we think the proposals may look like, I think that's permitted. But you're right, in terms of actually actioning or notifying these plan changes, it's don't do it.
Well, it's also if you're in the midst of one, isn't it? So, for example,
Yes,
the regional policy statement I just given you an example of in Otago, that's currently in mediation in front of the court, the Environment Court in this particular case, I think it is. That would have to stop too, wouldn't it?
That's my understanding. Yes, it would, because if you did proceed and court made a determination, there's only one that gets overturned, and that's by the Crown intervening.
Now, the government say that they're going to introduce, as I understand this, and perhaps you can tell me, Doug, because you remember I was in the Bay of Plenty on the East Coast, and sort of not quite as close as you were to where all these decisions and announcements were being made. But as I understand it, Doug, and can you tell me what your understanding is? The government's going to amend the legislation through the committee stages, which is it your understanding that this is imminent, like within the next few weeks, when the amendment of Chris Bishop, the legislative, if you like, intent of what Chris Bishop said, is going to be introduced into the House?
That's my understanding. I wouldn't be so bold as to say in the next few weeks. Probably the next few months might be more correct, but they've intimated it would be early. So, yeah, I would go in the next few months as opposed to the weeks, but we'll have to wait and see.
So that means that there'll be some councils, and mine would probably be one of them, just to be quietly, that will proceed as quickly as they can to get stuff finished too, wouldn't it, ahead of the law change?
I don't think that would be a particularly smart thing to do. As I said, in our case in the Bay of Plenty here, we put our water plan change on hold, but we're still running consultation and discussions with the rural community in particular in terms of those water plan changes, of what they could look like, what are the issues in particular catchments, because whether it's Otago or ourselves, there will be issues in terms of catchments where we do need action in terms of water quality and land use. And the discussions with the communities, I think, should continue as opposed to halting doing everything. So the quicker the government gives us an indication of what they want to do, and I think you've heard as well as I have, their intention is to have more, they refer to it as permitted activities. I think a better word is probably enabling activities, because when you use the word permitted, it indicates that there will be some things that are not permitted, where if you use enabling, there may be rules around those criteria in terms of enabling that we all have to work through. But it's not an ideal situation for staff or for elected members, let's be clear.
No, so it's uncertainty. Well, that's sort of the nature of life at the moment. We live in uncertain times. Listen, the other thing is the role of regional councils. You've heard Shane Jones, I'm sure all your colleagues have as well, on the future of regional councils. Is it your view, Doug, and I know you're in an entrenched position as chair, and I understand obviously what your sort of natural political view would be, but it is your view that the role of regional councils is a fair question, given that, God, It's been almost 45 years since the reorganisation of local government.